Welcome to The Velvet Myth. I'm your host, Adam. Thanks for tuning in, and it's so lovely to have your company. I truly hope tonight's story brings you comfort and peace. Before we begin tonight's tale, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Share it in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see our little community stretching across the world. And if you enjoy these stories and would like to help keep them coming, you can support the channel through our Patreon. You'll also unlock exclusive perks, including ad-free listening and early access to new stories. You'll find the link in the description. Now it's time to let yourself settle gently into the quiet comfort surrounding you. A familiar, peaceful space where your thoughts can soften and slowly drift away. Feel the warmth of your blankets wrapped around you, the gentle support beneath you, and the soothing stillness of the night welcoming you into rest. Allow your shoulders to loosen, your jaw to unclench, and the small muscles around your eyes to grow heavy and calm. With every slow breath, imagine the weight of the day melting away, little by little, leaving behind only softness, warmth, and ease. As your body sinks deeper into comfort, let your mind wander peacefully with tonight's story, knowing there is nowhere else you need to be and nothing more you need to do. Only this quiet moment, this cozy feeling, and the gentle promise of sleep drawing closer with every passing second. Now, simply relax, breathe slowly, allow yourself to drift into a calm and restful night. As the evening grows quiet, let us follow Lena into the warmth of the lantern-lit village. Lena had not meant to stop here. She had meant to keep walking, to find the inn before the light failed entirely, to do what she always did: push through, manage, arrive. But her boots had grown heavy on the road, her coat was soaked past the collar, and somewhere between the last hill and the first cobblestone, she had simply run out of forward motion. She stood beneath the slanted eave of a shuttered cottage at the village's edge, where the lane officially began, and the forested road behind her dissolved into rain and dark. Water dripped steadily from the eave's lip in a thin silver curtain. Not unpleasant to watch, even if she was thoroughly on the wrong side of it. Her canvas bag hung from one shoulder, heavier than it should have been, as bags tend to become when a journey has gone on a day too long. The village opened ahead of her in a soft amber haze. Paper lanterns were strung between the rooftops of the lane, a dozen of them, perhaps more, swaying almost imperceptibly in the rain-weighted air, their light pooling in long, honeyed reflections across the wet cobblestones below. They looked, Lena thought, like something that belonged in a memory rather than the present moment. Peaceful in the way that things are peaceful when you are too tired to want anything from them. She was still watching the lanterns when Eamon appeared. He came from further along the lane, moving with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had never once been in a hurry. The wide brim of his waxcloth hat shed rain in a quiet stream around him, and the lantern pole resting over one shoulder cast a warm, bobbing glow with each unhurried step. Lena saw his bright grey eyes find her easily, the way a person finds something they were not looking for, but somehow expected to be there. Eamon slowed and stopped, a few feet from her position beneath the eave, unhurried even in that. "Evening," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not require the rain to stop in order to be heard. "You've found yourself a reasonable spot." Lena managed a small, damp smile. "I didn't find it on purpose." "Most good spots aren't." He glanced up at the eave with a mild, considering expression, as though appraising it professionally. "Are you looking for somewhere in particular, or just looking?" "The inn," Lena said. "I didn't think the storm would settle this quickly." Eamon nodded, unsurprised. He stepped to the nearest lantern post, just at the lane's edge, and lifted the small glass door of the hand lantern at its base with practiced ease. From his coat pocket, he produced a short trimming tool, adjusted the wick with 2 quiet movements, and coaxed the flame from a modest flicker into something steadier and warmer. He watched it for a moment, with evident satisfaction, before closing the glass. "I'm heading toward the center of the village," he said, settling the pole back over his shoulder. "Lantern rounds. I do them every evening. The inn sits at the far end of the main lane." He looked at Lena with an expression that contained an invitation, but did not press it. "You're welcome to walk beside me, if you like." Lena looked at the rain, then at the lanterns swaying gently overhead, then at the steadiness of Eamon's unhurried stance. She stepped out from beneath the eave. The lane narrowed as they entered it, the timber-framed cottages pressing in on either side like quiet sentinels, their upper stories leaning slightly toward one another overhead. Strings of paper lanterns crossed the gap between rooftops, some burning steadily, some swaying dark in the wet air, and the rain fell through them in thin, glinting curtains. Eamon walked without hesitation, his boots finding the uneven cobblestones with the ease of long familiarity. The lantern pole balanced over his shoulder, casting its warm circle ahead of them both. Lena followed, a half step behind, her canvas bag pulled close against her side. The cobblestones were slick beneath her feet, and she moved carefully at first, watching where she stepped. Rainwater gathered in the grooves between the stones and ran in pale, wandering threads down the slope of the lane, finding its own unhurried way toward the river somewhere below. Eamon stopped at a post near a cottage gate. A lantern hung there on a bracket of bent iron, its flame so low it was barely a suggestion of orange inside the clouded glass. He set down the pole, opened the small hinged door with a motion no different from opening a familiar drawer, and leaned close to examine the wick. He said nothing for a moment. Then he made a small adjustment, and the flame gathered itself and rose, and the light spilled out across the wet gate and the mossy wall beside it and the puddle at Lena's feet. "They go dim from time to time," Eamon said, latching the glass closed. "It isn't a failure. It only means they need tending." He retrieved his pole and resumed walking. A lantern does not mind being lit again. That is, more or less, what it is for. Lena considered that as she fell back into step beside him. Above them, a laundry line stretched between 2 window frames, and the clothes that hung from it were rain-darkened and still, heavy with water, perfectly patient. She noticed she had been holding her shoulders up around her ears and let them drop. The shuttered windows of the cottages showed soft light at their edges, amber and a deeper amber seeping through wood and cloth. People inside settled for the evening, close to their fires, unaware of the lantern keeper and the tired traveller passing quietly outside. There was something gently levelling about that thought. The storm was everywhere and belonged to no one, and disturbed nothing that did not wish to be disturbed. A cat appeared from beneath a doorstep, crossed the lane in 4 brisk movements, and vanished behind a low wall. Eamon smiled, and the smile reached the corners of his grey eyes, and he did not break stride. Lena realised, somewhere in the middle of that unremarkable moment, that she was no longer listening for the end of the rain. She was simply listening to Eamon's boots on the wet stone, to the soft percussion of drops meeting the lantern casings overhead, to her own breath which had slowed without her deciding to slow it. They continued deeper into the village, and the strings of amber lanterns multiplied above them, swaying gently in the damp air, each one burning with quiet purpose. Eamon walked on, unhurried as the rain itself, and Lena matched her steps to his, and for the first time in a long while, matching her steps to something else, felt less like surrender and more like rest. The florist's shop occupied a narrow gap between 2 taller buildings, its window bowed slightly outward, as if leaning toward the lane to offer itself to passers-by. Behind the glass, chrysanthemums stood in iron buckets, white and amber and a deep rust red that the lamplight warmed to something almost living. And behind them, loose branches of late autumn foliage leaned against the wall, in quiet arrangements, their leaves still clinging, though barely. Eamon stopped without announcement, simply slowing and then ceasing, the way a river pools where the ground dips. Lena stopped beside him. The glass had fogged from the warmth within, and the flowers were half dissolved into soft colour and suggestion. Eamon tucked his lantern pole under one arm, reached forward, and wiped a slow circle in the misted pane with the cuff of his oilskin sleeve. The chrysanthemums sharpened into view, unhurried, perfectly still, indifferent to the rain outside and the lateness of the hour. "There," he said, as though he had simply been locating something he knew was there. Lena leaned in slightly, the cold glass close to her face. The flowers had the quality of things that did not know they were beautiful, which, she thought, was perhaps the purest kind of beauty. "They'll be gone by the week's end," Eamon said, not mournfully, but with the easy tone of someone stating a pleasant fact. Blooms never apologize for fading. They just give what colour they can while they're here, and then they let go. He lowered his arm and glanced at her sidelong. "There's something very reasonable about that, I've always thought." Lena said nothing immediately. She watched the condensation slowly reclaim the circle Eamon had wiped clear, the flowers softening again into amber blur. She did not try to stop it. They walked on. The baker's courtyard opened off a side passage so narrow that the eaves nearly touched overhead, channeling the rain into twin streams that fell on either side of them like curtains. A single lantern hung on an iron hook in the courtyard wall, its flame reduced to a tentative flicker by the damp air. Eamon noticed this before Lena did, and was already reaching for his oil tin before they fully emerged from the passage. What reached Lena first was not light, but warmth, and with the warmth, a smell so whole and unambiguous that it stopped thought entirely. Bread, yeast and heat and faint sweetness, smoke from a wood oven, wet stone beneath it all, the smell of the rain that had soaked into the courtyard stones over many years, over many evenings, exactly like this one. Through the half-open back door of the bakehouse, a single silhouette moved slowly. The baker, broad-shouldered and deliberate, lifting finished loaves from a rack and stacking them with practiced ease. The golden light behind him never wavered. He did not look out. Lena breathed in once, and then again, and felt something unknot that she had not known was tightened. "I had forgotten," she said quietly, "that a smell could feel like rest." Eamon replaced the cap on his oil tin, and the courtyard lantern steadied into a warm, committed glow. Eamon looked satisfied, in the small, private way he always did when a flame held. "Supper," he said, with a gentle gravity, "has rescued more troubled minds than philosophy ever managed." He adjusted the lantern pole on his shoulder, and, with considerably less argument. Lena smiled, and the smile came from somewhere unguarded. The lane released them onto the bridge, without ceremony, a narrow stone arch, barely wide enough for a cart, its railing worn smooth by decades of palms resting, just as Lena's did now. Below, the river moved in the unhurried way of things that have been moving a very long time. It was dark and glassy and pocked all over by rain, each drop opening a small circle that widened and dissolved before it could reach the bank. Lena watched those gold lines and did not move from her place. At the railing, a few pale leaves came drifting under the arch, thin and spent, turning slowly, and the widening rings of rain swallowed them gently downstream. She found she could follow them with her eyes until they disappeared, and she did not feel the need to look away. Behind them, somewhere along the far bank, a barge bell sounded, a single low note, muffled by the storm and the distance between things. A dock chain answered it briefly, and then both sounds faded back into the rain. Eamon came to stand beside her at the railing. He did not speak immediately. He looked down at the river, the way a person looks at something they genuinely enjoy looking at, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that does not ask to be filled. It was Lena who filled it, and she surprised herself when she did. "I have not been able to stop thinking," she said. The words came out plainly, without preamble, as though she had only now realized they were true. "For months, even when I am completely exhausted, even when there is nothing left that thinking can do." The rain tapped steadily on the stone. The river continued its unhurried work below. Eamon did not turn to look at her. He nodded once, slowly, with the weight of someone who has heard this before, not because it is common, but because it matters every time. "Rivers," he said at last, "do not empty themselves in one evening." He rested both forearms on the railing and leaned there, comfortable and unhurried. Minds rarely do either. Lena considered that. She did not try to answer it or extend it into something larger. She simply held it, the way you hold a warm stone picked up from a path. "You are not failing at rest," Eamon added quietly. "You are only still carrying what you carried in. It takes a little walking before things lighten." Lena exhaled, a long, slow breath that she had perhaps been holding since long before the storm. The sound of the rain moved into the space it left behind. The river did not pause. The lantern light continued its broken geometry across the water, patient and unconcerned with anything but shining. She did not feel fixed. She did not feel finished. But something in the pressure behind her eyes eased by a small and genuine degree the way weather eases just before a clearing comes, quietly, without announcement, without asking to be noticed. Eamon retrieved his pole from the railing and settled it back onto his shoulder. "One more stretch," he said, "and then the inn." The square opened before them, like a held breath, finally released. Lena stepped off the last cobblestones of the lane and felt the space expand around her. Wider sky, wider air, the rain descending through the lantern light in fine golden threads that crossed and dissolved and crossed again. She had not expected beauty here, in the middle of a storm, in the middle of a square she had never seen before. But there it was, quiet and unhurried, asking nothing of her. A fountain at the center of the square had filled to overflowing, its basin brimming with a soft, continuous murmur as water found the cracks between the stones and ran in thin, bright lines toward the drains. The market stalls along the far edge were shuttered and still, their canvas awnings gleaming darkly, each one holding a small, trembling pool of rainwater that spilled at the corners in steady silver threads. The village had drawn inward for the night, and in doing so, it had become luminous. Every lamp, every lit window, a deliberate answer to the dark. Eamon crossed toward the well at the square's edge without hurrying, his boots finding the wet stones with the ease of a man who had walked this route through every kind of weather the years could offer. Lena followed, her canvas bag no longer feeling like a burden at her shoulder, but simply something she carried, the way the square carried rain, without complaint. Eamon straightened, the lamp by the well, adjusting its hang with 2 careful fingers until it sat level and true. A gust moved through the square, brief and a little playful, and one of the far lanterns dipped and swayed. Eamon stepped toward it and raised one broad hand to cup the flame, shielding it until the gust passed. The flame bent, recovered, and held. He lowered his hand and nodded, satisfied with so small a thing. "Storms make a village kinder," Eamon said, without looking back at Lena. "They ask everyone, to keep a little closer to their light. Lena looked around the square and understood what he meant. The amber glow in the inn windows across the way was not the light of a distant goal. It was simply light, the same as any other lantern on Eamon's route, steady and sufficient, and warm. She was not measuring the distance to it anymore. She was standing in the rain and listening to it fall on rooftops and canvas and stone, and the sound was not an obstacle. It was company. Eamon unhooked a small spare lantern from the lower ring of his pole and turned it in his hands, checking the wick with a thumb, confirming the reservoir of oil. It was a modest thing, no larger than a jar, its casing dented at one side from some long-ago moment she would never know. He shook it gently, listening for the quiet slosh of fuel inside, and gave a small nod. Together, without deciding to, they began walking the last few paces toward the inn. The eaves above its door reached out over the lane like an arm extended in welcome. The rain fell behind them. The lanterns in the square continued their quiet geometry of light, each one tending its own small portion of the dark, asking nothing in return. Lena felt gratitude settle into her chest. Not loudly, not in a rush, but the way warmth settles into cold hands held near a fire. Slowly, genuinely, with nowhere else to go. Eamon stopped beneath the inn's porch with the quiet certainty of a man who had arrived at this precise threshold many times before and found it sufficient, every one of them. He reached into the deep pocket of his oilskin coat and produced the spare lantern, the small, dented one he had checked at the square, and held it out to Lena with both hands, as though the gesture itself were the point. Lena took it carefully, the metal still faintly warm from being carried close to him through the rain. "One light," Eamon said, his voice unhurried as river water. "That is all it ever was. People keep waiting for a brighter one before they allow themselves to settle." He tilted his head slightly, grey eyes catching the amber from the porch lamp above them. "But one is enough when you stop asking it to be the whole dawn." Lena looked down at the lantern in her hands, then back up at him. She felt her voice when it came, steadier than she had expected, steadier than it had been when she first spoke to him beneath the dripping eave, what felt like a long, changed hour ago. "Thank you," she said, "not only for the light." Eamon smiled, that particular smile of his, small and unhurried, that lived mostly in the creasing around his eyes. He touched the brim of his wax cloth hat with 2 fingers and turned without another word, stepping back down off the porch and into the rain. Lena watched him go. His figure moved across the glowing square with that same unhurried steadiness she had spent the whole evening gradually learning. And then the mist and the lantern light received him, and he was simply part of the village again, indistinct, belonging entirely to the night he tended. Lena turned and pushed open the inn door. The warmth reached her before anything else. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but present and immediate, like a room that had been quietly waiting. firelight moved on the low ceiling. Somewhere, deeper in the building, a kettle made its small, unhurried sound. The air held the scent of wool and dried herbs, and something faintly sweet she couldn't name, and it asked nothing of her at all. Lena crossed to a low table near the hearth and set the lantern down upon it. She straightened, slipped the canvas bag from her shoulder and placed it on the floor beside her boots. Then she loosened her coat and sat. The rain continued beyond the windows, steady and soft, the same rain that had been falling all evening. It sounded different from inside, not like weather to be endured, but like a patient thing, keeping watch. The fire ticked. The kettle quieted. The lantern Eamon had given her glowed its modest, faithful gold against the hearthstone. Lena let her shoulders drop. She let her breath come slowly. Peace had not arrived at the end of the road. It had been waiting, she understood now, for her to stop walking long enough to let it in. She closed her eyes and rested.